So yes to sediment here.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So what you do is you pour, and the wine goes beautifully down, but then explodes in the glass. New world versus old world, or red and white, or sweet and dry. But I think it's really helpful, actually, if we think about the world of wine as fine wine and fun wine. I call it thinky drinky. So it's basically wines that are very drinkable and smashable and fun. But if you want to just pause a second and look for some detail and quality or interest, it's there as well. That is Pét-nat to the consumer. And the consumer doesn't really care how you got there.
Okay.
What they care about is it doesn't explode and cover the kitchen ceiling.
Yeah.
When you go into a restaurant and the wine server or wine waiter or sommelier opens your bottle and then smells the cork, this drives me crazy. And I'll tell you why.
Hi everybody, this is Agnes from No Sediment and welcome to No Sediment Wine Podcast. Today my guest is winemaker and master of wine, Tim Wildman. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yourself?
Good. I'm good, yeah, good, also good. I've been wanting to do this interview with you for a while now, so we're finally, well, you came to me. I'm very happy. So I'm not sure if I can ask you this question knowing how you feel about it, but maybe could you introduce yourself with the audience and tell us how your wine journey began?
Yeah, sure. How my wine journey began. So it's interesting. I think I've never had a really kind of like quick answer for this. I often think like being in the wine industry all my life and becoming a master of wine, I should have some story about how, I don't know, I sat on my grandfather's knee drinking a teaspoon of Chateau Yquem. It just didn't happen. But in the past, when I've tried to think about this, it actually started in my gap year, my year off after school before university.
Yeah.
And I went traveling. I went to Australia for 6 months, and I didn't do the usual tourist thing going up the East Coast. I actually hitchhiked around the whole country. Like this whole circumference of Australia, I did it on my thumb, which was an incredible adventure. And this was like late 80s, so no mobile phones, no internet. And that gave me the travel bug and the adventure bug. And if I'm being really honest with myself, I fell in love with Australia then as well, so it was fantastic. Many years later, I ended up being an Australian buyer and eventually making wine and living in Australia. But I think that was the start of it. I think travel came first. Then I went to university. I read English literature because I just enjoyed reading. And at university, like in my first year, when you don't know anyone, you're trying to make friends, I had a ground floor room that was next to the path to the car park. And in those days, you could buy these like home kits of winemaking from a shop. And I had these demijohns of making like home kit wine that from memory cost, I can make a bottle of wine for 15 pence. So like 20 euro cents. But because everyone walked from the car park, they saw them on my windowsill and I made friends. That's how I made friends. So kind of like, that was because before that, I just drank beer. Like in my 6 months in Australia, I just drank beer. Of course I did. I was 18, you know?
Yeah.
And then I suppose what eventually led to wine was my parents at the time lived in the Lake District in the UK, which is a beautiful area in the northwest. I used to go there every summer during university. I worked in a local, pub. But I used to love walking the dogs every day. They lived in the middle of nowhere. So all day I'd walk the dogs. In the evening, my dad made homemade wine, but like from fruit. So step up from the university stuff.
Yeah.
So bramble wine was the red and elderflower wine was the white. And we just had them in glass bottles during the week. And then at weekends, we actually had a bottle of wine with a label on. That was the treat. And I can remember being in the last summer of university and thinking, okay, I've got to grow up. I've got to get a job. What do I love doing? I love walking the dogs. Can I make money out of that? I thought not. I probably should have actually.
I think you can.
Yeah. And then I thought, well, I enjoy drinking Dad's wine. And I had that. And then honestly, I just got a job in a wine shop.
All right.
But when I'm really honest with myself, it was the travel. And then in the first few years of being in the wine industry, I traveled a lot. So it was the travel thing that came first. And honestly, I could have been a photographer. I could have been a journalist. It just happened to be wine. But it was travel first, people second, and kind of wine was just a way to do that.
But you're also a master of wine. It is one of the most elite wine titles, I think, currently in the world. And yet you are making low intervention Pét-nat with the super fun labels. So is that a rebellion against wine being too serious?
I don't think so. I think my Pét-nat journey, and that is my main business. Like I've been making Pét-nat in Australia, Wildman Wine, Astro Bunny, Piggy Pop for 13 years now. 2014 was the first vintage. Then I lived out there for 6 years. I came back to the UK in 2019, started making Lost in a Field, the English Pét-nat. That journey started when I was halfway through my MW studies. Up until that point, so the first 15 years of my wine career, I'd worked for retailers, wholesalers, importers, but it was always like quite a large kind of new world bias, and Australia was my speciality. And I worked with New Zealand wines and South African wines. But then halfway through the MW course, I changed jobs, and I went to work for this company in the UK called Les Caves de Pérenne, who are one of the original largest importers of now what we'd call natural wine, but they started in the 80s just importing, wine from Cahors and Madaran and southwest France and Jura and like lesser known regions in France. And I've got to say, for the first 2 years, I really struggled.
Okay.
Yeah, because I had this really clean New World Australian palate, and all these wines were like cloudy and like funky and yeah, and it was like, it was hard. And I think if you ask anyone who is in the natural wine world, and let's just call it natural wine because we know what we mean by that, I think everyone can point to one bottle. Like, I really believe this. You ask anyone. And mine was a bottle of Sébastien Riffaut Sancerre. And I can remember it vividly, like it was yesterday. I was living in South London. It was winter. I remember it being cold. I'd been out on the road all day, seeing customers. I got home, and I remember primarily I was hungry, so hungry. I was like, okay, I'm going to put some bowl of pasta on. And what have I got to drink? There was nothing in the house apart from this sample in the fridge of this really cloudy, if you know Riffaut, cloudy Sancerre. I was like, oh, God, really? Do I have to drink that? And I opened it, and I kid you not, like the bottle was almost gone by the time the pasta had cooked. I kind of ate the wine. That was my sensation. I consumed the wine. And from that moment, there was no looking back, because what happened in that moment was, I think as we grow up in wine and we learn more and we do our WSET classes, we're told to look at wine with our eyes, we're told to smell wine with our nose, taste it with our palate, think about it with our brain. And all those activities are what I think of as being above the neck. If we're lucky, maybe we'll get a little shiver from a beautiful Pinot Noir and our heart will swell a little bit, but it's all above the neck. But that night in London, when I drank the Riffaut, my stomach got involved. My stomach recognized something alive and nutritious in that wine. And when your stomach gets involved with drinking, there's no going back. And I've talked to many people over the years who love natural wine, love good natural wine, and make good natural wine. And that all resonates with them, that when you begin drinking with your stomach, nutritious wines that are alive. So that then led me down a path. And then eventually I decided I wanted to be self-employed and actually just make some wine, having been in the industry for so long. So it's kind of inevitable for me that I would end up making something like Pét-nat or natural wine. So I don't know if that answers your question. Was it a rebellion? It wasn't actually. It was just me on my journey.
Gravitating towards that naturally.
Finding an interesting path.
Okay. So you said that you started your Pét-nat in Australia 13 years ago. Were you amongst the first ones to do that in Australia?
It's really interesting. In 2014, it's my first vintage, there were literally 5 people making Pét-nat in Australia. And now there's like probably 500. The reason I chose Pét-nat was when I used to work in London and we had visiting winemakers, I used to take them to a restaurant called Terroir, and we would have Pét-nat from Pierre and Catherine Breton in the Loire, and it was a wine style that some winemakers had never seen, never tasted. And I loved showing it to people because when the wines first arrived, early spring, they weren't that fizzy. And then over the course of the summer, they'd kind of become fizzier and drier. It was like a living thing. It was so unusual. And then I found myself in Australia. And the truth is, like, I'm not a trained winemaker, right? So I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to just be some MW who lands in Australia and makes an $80 Pinot Noir, you know? I don't think that was the right thing to do. But I thought, okay, there's almost no one making Pét-nats in Australia. Like, I know this much about Pét-nat, like quite a lot from having traveled around France. But if everyone else knows even little, then I'll be the expert. And it was just a time in Australia when there was a community in South Australia, in the Adelaide Hills, particularly the Basket Range, where producers like Lucy Margot, James Erskine at Jaume, Tawasakoto at Dakota Barrels, BK at BK Wines, all these people were kind of just starting out their businesses, and almost everyone started making a Pét-nat. And we were a community of friends, so we would, you know, eat together, drink together, work together, borrow equipment off each other and swap ideas. So it was this amazing community where we all learned really quickly from each other, the kind of, you know, the science and the art of making Pét-nat. So it was like, yeah, super exciting time to be involved in that.
So within that community, everyone knew what Pét-nat was, but did you need to explain that style to like outsiders, other people? I mean, at least here in Europe, you know, we usually associate Australia and New Zealand with these really clean, pure, fruit-driven wine style.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you have this, cloudy example.
Yeah, it's a good question. Pét-nat, it just exploded in Australia. Okay. I mean, you know, no pun intended. It was, it just, within a few years, you could go into a wine shop in Melbourne or Sydney, and there'd be the fridges, and you'd have a champagne fridge, a rosé fridge, a Pét-nat fridge. You go into a restaurant, like a normal restaurant, not a natural wine bar, and there'd be champagne page, Pét-nat page. Like, I remember sitting in a normal restaurant in Melbourne once, counting 42 Pét-nats on the list.
Oh, wow.
And unless you've been to Australia, you don't realise that, because around the world, Pét-nat has kind of developed at a different pace. So there was certainly a huge amount of interest. I think that very much aligns with the fact that it's fun wine, it's unpretentious wine. It is really made for drinking in parks, in the sunshine, and on the beach, and that's the Australian outdoor lifestyle. And then for myself, as like an English guy, making Pét-nat, you know, because for the first 4 years, I did everything myself. I picked the grapes, I stomped the grapes, I bottled by hand, I labeled by hand, I put bottles in a rucksack, I flew interstate and knocked on doors, sold by hand. And for like an English guy to turn up at a restaurant and go, I want to show you some Pét-nat, that's quite challenging. So from the start, I think this is where it all links together. My background from so many years, quite a conventional palate, the classics, New World, plus the Master of Wine, I felt that what I wanted to drink, but also my angle, my USP could be to always make clean, fruity, fault-free Pét-nat. And over the years, that's been something that I've worked incredibly hard at and found natural solutions to do that. So eventually, the Australian Pét-nat and the English one, they've become known as like the acceptable face of Pét-nat, if you like. And it's really exciting now, like after 12 years, the Australian wines, Astro Bunny, we're getting listings in like major supermarkets around the world. Like we're in Dan Murphy's in Australia nationally. We're in Whole Foods Market in the US nationally. First Pét-nats for both companies. Plus there's a very traditional wine merchants in the UK called the Wine Society. They've been around like 150 years. And they've got my Astro Bunny Pét-nat with a crazy rabbit on the front label. And I get such a kick from that. Like, you know, these wines, you expect them to be in hipster wine bars, but actually I get as much satisfaction, if not more, from being listed in these quite traditional channels, because it shows that I've built something that is really different and people like trust, and all the hard work kind of pays off.
Yeah. All right. But can you just explain the audience as well, what is Pét-nat? And
Sure.
maybe like what is the difference between méthode ancestrale and Pét-nat, if there is any?
Yeah.
Because we're talking about the wine.
Absolutely.
Style,
Well,
but
while we're talking, should we pour one?
yeah.
So I've got the English Pét-nat here, lost in a field. So this is a wine that I make from what I call heritage grape varieties. So people know English sparkling wine these days for being like English champagne, if you like, Pinot Chardonnay, traditional method, which all sort of started in the 90s in the UK. But there was actually an industry before that in the 60s and 70s, which was very amateur, very small scale. People often had, sort of, half a hectare planted in their back garden. They'd make the wine on site. So as a model, it was more Burgundian than like the modern industry is more like, champagne houses. And back then they used German grape varieties because they were early ripening in a cold climate. So I tracked down all those old vineyards, some of which were abandoned. And that's why it's called Lost in a Field, because some of the vineyards really were just in the middle of nowhere, abandoned. Because I just had a hunch that those German grape varieties like Reichensteiner, Madeleine Langevin, Schomburger, Huxelrebe.
Are those hybrids, by the way?
Crosses. Yeah, crosses. I just had a hunch they'd make a kind of fruity, aromatic, soft, gentle Pét-nat. So my Pét-nats are always intentionally underscourged. So there's a little bit of sediment, and they're better shaken because we work very hard to make sure the sediment isn't muddy or rocky. It's actually fine sand. That's a phrase we use in the winery.
So yes to sediment here.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And but a very fine sediment, which is important. And then this has been in my backpack this morning, so I'm just going to be a little bit more careful than I normally am. There you go, it's okay. And we aim for about 3 bar of pressure normally, which I think works quite nicely with Pét-nats. There you go, yeah. That's because it's a little bit warm and I've been walking around, but I'll give you that glass.
Yes, thank you. And we came prepared.
Perfect. Cheers.
Cheers. Do you swirl Pét-nat? Yeah, you do.
Well, I just did because I'm not a big swirler in general, but just you do tend to get, without getting too technical, it can be a little bit reductive when you first open it because it's been trapped in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I kind of gave a little kind of involuntary swirl there, but
Okay, so what is the Pét-nat?
yeah,
You're
sure.
tasting the Pét-nat.
Well, I always ask people, what do you think of it?
So we had an interesting discussion yesterday about terroir and wines, and somehow I thought that I could taste maybe the English style here, but actually the acidity is not that high, as I would have expected for British sparkling wine or British Pét-nat. Yeah, it drinks quite nicely, no?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as you said, it does provide some nutrition. And it has almost zero funk.
Great, thank you.
Is that like a compliment or that's
100%.
Okay.
100%. Yeah.
I mean, I do feel at the finish, but it could also come from the yeast. Like you feel that, yeasty depth, or that mouth feel.
Yeah.
But it's not funky. It is quite prudent, maybe floral even. Prudent.
Yeah, great. I mean, that's the highest compliment anyone can say because, I mean, at the end of the day, it is a zero sulfur, naturally made wine. So, it shouldn't taste clinically clean. I mean, there will be a sensation of this is a bit different.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, all those kind of funky elements and, Pét-nat often suffers actually from, you can have all the problems of low intervention, low-fi, no sulfur winemaking. Mousiness often is something that you get in Pét-nat because of that. Just a tiny bit of sulfur would stop mousiness. But then you overlay that with the specific problems of Pét-nat, which can be related to the pressure and the sediment. So you can get Pét-nats that when you open them, they, hit the ceiling, or they're too flat, a flat nat, or the sediment's too muddy. So actually, there's a lot to think about to get the wine in the bottle with the right amount of pressure, the right amount of sediment, and clean, which just involves, it's no secret, just really careful work in the vineyard, very, very careful grape selection by hand, and then working very cleanly, very quickly in the winery. But to explain Pét-nat, the easiest way I've ever come up with explaining Pét-nat is it is a wine that has its primary fermentation interrupted by bottling.
Okay, that's so cool. That's like a definition, and so...
That is the definition.
Yeah, it's so...
Now,
I like it.
Where you go from there are all sorts of different angles. But if you want to think about it, I think it's often easy to think about the two original artisan Pét-nats and how they've informed the modern styles. So they are from France and Italy. So from France, you have what they would call méthode ancestrale, which actually predates méthode champenoise. Like,
I would guess.
There were records in the south of France, Limoux down there, going back to the 17th century, of wine being made intentionally sparkling by bottling it with a bit of sugar still left, and it goes, it ferments in the bottle. So you've got your méthode ancestrale history, but then in northern Italy, you've got Col Fondo. Now, Col Fondo is less well understood. It's a smaller industry, but traditional Col Fondo was a product of two vintages. So when you try and think about how do you make sparkling wine before technology, the French came up with a method, like interrupting the primary bottling, the primary fermentation. The Italians said, okay, let's make the wine, let it ferment to dryness. So we got a big barrel of wine sitting there. And the following year, when we pick the second year of grapes, we get some of that fresh juice and we just add it and bottle it. So Col Fondo means with the bottom, so they're bottling the tank with sediment. So true Col Fondo in Italy is a 2-year process, whereas méthode ancestrale is a 1-year process. And then you start getting into the modern interpretations. So Pét-nat was sort of revived in the 80s in the Loire Valley by a group of natural winemakers. But the modern interpretation, and particularly how we were doing it in Australia, one of the challenges is we're not in the Loire Valley. We don't have cold cellars, cold autumns. So you're having to manage warm temperatures. So basically, a method was developed in Australia, which we call basically intermission. So interruption is when you bottle halfway through the primary ferment. Intermission is taking a bit from Col Fondo. So you ferment a tank dry. Mm-hmm. And then what we did in the early days, myself and James Erskine and others, we would go back to the same vineyard a few weeks later and do a second pick of the grapes. Now in Australia, you can do that. You can leave grapes out in the vineyard for another 3 weeks because there's little disease pressure. You get that fresh juice, come back, add it to the tank, mix it up and bottle it. Then it goes fizzy in the bottle. So now basically you have these two methods of Pét-nat production. Intermission, which is actually quite difficult to do, very hard to control. And most intermission wines have to be disgorged because they're too fizzy or there's too much sediment. And interruption wines, you can control the pressure in the sediment. And for the last few years, I've done an event in the UK called Pét-nat, where we get all the English and Welsh Pét-nats together for one festival in one day. And we have like 60, 70 wines now from 40, 50 producers. So it's small, but it's a thing. And I always ask people how they make the wine. And I would say 80% of modern English and Welsh Pét-nat is the second method, the intermission, not the interruption. Because it's kind of like, it's the smart way to make Pét-nat. It's controllable. Okay. So that really is a long answer to a short question. There's lots of different ways to get there, but I've always said that what really counts is how it presents to the consumer. So, if there is a wine in a sparkling weight bottle with some bubbles, clear glass, crown cap, probably some kind of colourful label, that is Pét-nat to the consumer. And the consumer doesn't really care how you got there.
Okay.
What they care about is it doesn't explode and cover the kitchen ceiling. Yeah. It tastes nice. So in the world of Pét-nat winemaking, we have these very detailed conversations about what do you call this, what don't you call it. But as far as I'm concerned, the whole category is Pét-nat, and within it you have different ways of achieving that.
All right. So can Pét-nat be disgorged then? It can.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you can still call it Pét-nat then, according to you.
Because, I love going to natural wine fairs and talking to the producers. And when I go to the Raw Fair in London every year, I seek out all the Pét-nat producers. They're usually French and Italian, and there's usually about 20 of them. And I say to all of them, what method you used, disgorged, underscourged. It's normally about 50-50. And sometimes they'll just say, oh yeah, my biggest customer is a restaurant down the road and he likes it disgorged.
Okay, yeah.
Like there's no real philosophy around it often. It's just what works.
So I have prepared this question and maybe you will think or understand where it's going, but is Pét-nat a punk rock in the wine world?
Punk rock, yeah. That's kind of, how did I hear a journalist describe it once? Champagne's hip little sister.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, I can talk about the markets I currently do a lot of work in, which is the UK. And whatever your definition of punk rock is, like something disruptive, something homemade, lo-fi, accessible, has high energy, counterculture, kind of ticks all those boxes, because the modern English wine industry, as it's grown, is very traditional, traditional method, wealthy people making wineries, and there's a lot of sort of, images of Land Rovers and black Labradors and red trousers, and it's that kind of quite sort of smart. And Pét-nat is made by people who've got no money, often no vineyard. You can buy some grapes, make it, and the people are often either young or small operations. So yeah, I'll go with that definition actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's my next question then. So once something becomes popular and commercially successful, can it still be punk then?
So that's a great question. As yet, we have not seen any global wine company successfully try and make Pét-nat.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, here's an interesting thing. They tried. So when Jacobs Creek was owned by Pernod Ricard in Australia, they could see how successful Pét-nat was in wine bars and with young people and getting onto restaurant lists everywhere. So I had a meeting where I met the head of Pernod Ricard winemakers about 5 years ago, and they'd had like a kind of secret R&D project going on in the Barossa to make Pét-nat and orange wine, interestingly, these kind of two really cool hipster styles. And then they tried to sell them into their normal sales channels, and they just failed. And then a couple of years later, Dan Murphy's, the big wine superstore in Australia, approached me to buy Astro Bunny. And I found it really interesting, a lesson that, often wine just isn't the product. There's a lot more to it than that. And these companies, like Dan Murphy's or Whole Foods, they want to buy a Pét-nat, but they want to buy a Pét-nat with integrity that's been made by an individual person with a story and a personality. So that's where I think it's never broken through into what you'd call mass market global. I mean, we sell to 16 export markets, so that's pretty big for a Pét-nat brand.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think some have tried, but no one's done it yet. It's not gone what you'd call mainstream.
Okay.
I hope it does. Yeah.
All right. So I want to ask you, do you have any horror story that you can share with me, something that went terribly wrong when you were making your wines? So I'm a horror movie fan, and I thought that would be...
Yeah, 100%. I'm going to be honest. I mean, I made all the mistakes in the early years.
Okay, of course. Usually in the beginning.
Yeah, of course. That's how you learn. But luckily, it was all really small scale. And because of the nature of the Pét-nat market was emerging, it was so young, I could still kind of sell those wines. So 2014, the first vintage, I had no idea what I was doing really. The wine, it was bottled, the pressure was too high, and then it developed these huge tartrate crystals, like crab claws, that big in the bottle. And we have a video of the very first opening. And it was in the lab of the winery where I was working at the time, this beautifully clean white lab. And the first vintage was actually made from Grenache, not the Italian varieties I later used. And the bottle is opened, and the entire contents of the bottle cover this white laboratory ceiling and walls and me and the person I was opening it with. So that was an explosive Pét-nat. So we had to break up the tartrate crystals by shaking the bottles. You couldn't just riddle in a machine. So I shook 600 bottles, about a minute each. So I think my arms grew about an inch doing that. The next year, we doubled production from like 1 ton to 2 ton. The next year, I was bottling by hand, and I was alone in a winery, and I had about 1,500 litres to bottle by hand, and it took me 24 hours. I started at midday and I worked all afternoon, all evening, through the night into the morning. And during that period, because the wine was still fermenting, so for the first few vintages, I used the interruption method, it lost half its sugar. So the second half of the bottling had almost no sugar, so it didn't really go fizzy. So I had a flat nat that year.
But it's such an interesting story. Like I wouldn't even think about it, but it's true.
Yeah, and then the third year so the first 4 years I made it at friends' wineries. The third year I was making it at a friend's winery, just like a kind of 1,000-litre tank. And he suddenly said, "Oh, we got grapes coming in next week. You have to move out." I was like, "I can't bottle yet." He said, "No, move out." So I had to put 1,000-litre plastic Palicon cube on a trailer and drive it 5 miles to another winery of fermenting wine on the back of a trailer. And then 2017 was the last mistake year. After the second vintage, I started making 2 wines, Astro Bunny and Piggy Pop. And in 2017, just 1 tank of each, still small scale. The tank of Piggy Pop got like really bad VA, but like really bad VA, like beyond legal limits, but also just tasted terrible. And I made the decision just to pour it all away to protect the brand.
Okay.
And, I think the image of Pét-nat's quite interesting. It's a great, exciting, fun wine, but some people do actually have a negative image about it because they've had bad examples, because there are bad examples out there. And so it had VA. Could we have sold it in the market in those days? Almost certainly. But I decided to sacrifice it. So I think when you're making wine in that natural, no sulfur way, you're walking that tightrope. Sometimes you've got to make a hard decision like that. And then after that, it all kind of went okay.
Can Pét-nat express terroir?
Do you know what? It's like, I taste and talk Pét-nat so much. I cannot talk about Pét-nat and food and wine matching with a straight face. It's Pét-nat. It's a fun wine. It's meant to be drunk. Yes, there are certain things it goes well with, sort of as an aperitif, or maybe with some, fruit or desserts. It's a palate cleanser. And I think the same is almost the same as talking about terroir. If you understand how Pét-nat is made, you are literally picking the grapes, you're putting them in a tank, there's no additives, and then you're bottling, and then it stays in the bottle and it gets released. Like, as a winemaker, there's very few levers there to do anything apart from just express the freshly picked grapes. So if this one, for example, some people say it has, a sense of Englishness, I think some of the grape varieties, the Madeleine Angevine particularly, has that sort of hedgerow, white flower, almost elderflower thing, which does taste quite English. It doesn't have the high acidity that you talked about, because what we've learned over the years, almost by accident, is the superpower of these German varieties is the fact you can pick them at really low alcohol and they're flavor ripe. So this is 9.5% alcohol. And what I'm always listening for when people are tasting, because I never like to say how the wine tastes. I don't like putting words in people's mouths. I always pour the wine and then shut up and just listen. I hope that people think it's fully flavored. It doesn't feel thin, like skimmed milk.
No, definitely.
But it's only 9.5% alcohol.
Yeah.
Whereas if you picked Chardonnay in the south of England and made a wine at 9.5%, it would be like battery acid. It would be undrinkable. So these German crosses have this amazing superpower. And on that, when I started the project, I started the Instagram account when I was going around looking for the vineyards before I made the first wine. I thought, I can't keep referring to these grapes as like German cross varieties. Such a mouthful. So the very first Instagram post, I called them heritage grape varieties. And like all of a sudden, all these like people were emailing me, journalists and winemakers going, what are these heritage varieties you're working with, Tim? I'm like, oh, German crosses. But yeah, you just add the word heritage to something and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Okay. So, you know, I don't think Pét-nat expresses terroir, mainly because it's not the job of Pét-nat to express terroir. And I think this is something that's often, you know, not talked about enough with winemaking, that you have quality that's set in the vineyard, like, you know, quality is set in the vineyard with the grapes. You can't really augment quality in the winery. You can, but in the winery, you change style. So that, I think it's a very useful way of thinking about things. Quality in the vineyard, style in the winery, because style is winemaker choice. So as a winemaker, you decide whether you're going to make a terroir wine or an age-worthy wine or a drink-young wine. And all those decisions are related to when you pick and how you process the grapes. So Pét-nat is, by its nature, a drink immediately, drink young, drink cold, casual drinking sort of wine, fun wine. So no one's thinking about terroir when they're making it. And in this particular instance, there's so few of these old vineyards around. I have a pool of about 8 growers all across the south of England. So I'm getting different grapes from different counties. I get grapes from Herefordshire in the west, and Wiltshire, and Devon, and Hampshire, and Sussex, and Kent, and on and on. So there's no sense of identity and location there. It's just getting the right grapes and making the style you want. So I would say to talk about terroir and Pét-nat in the same sentence is almost like a category error. It's like it's not fine wine, it's fun wine. So it does other things, and expressing terroir isn't really its job.
So you talked about fun versus fine wine. So how do you see the difference between these two categories?
Okay, I'm glad you asked, because I like talking about this, fun wine versus fine wine. So I brought along 2 bottles from Spain that I think represent this the best. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to open them now, but before I do, I'm going to say that I often think that we can think about the world of wine in sort of binary ways. We can think about new world versus old world, or red and white, or sweet and dry. And this is often how we think about it. But I think it's really helpful, actually, if we think about the world of wine as fine wine and fun wine. They're 2 very different things. And fine wine, we know what fine wine is. There's a lot of it here. Fine wine is all about sense of place, terroir. It's often expensive. There's often a scarcity to it. It's often age-worthy. It often needs to breathe in a carafe when you're opening it. It's collectible, etc., 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 etc. And fun wine has a lot of things to do, but none of those things. Fun wine is about freshness, drinkability, smashability, simplicity in a way. It can still be made from very high quality grapes and very conscientiously, but it's doing a different job. And I think sometimes in the wine industry or the wine trade, fine wine language and vocabulary casts a shadow over the rest of the industry, and we shouldn't be talking about those fine wine things. So,
do we need to bring more glasses?
No, it's fine. Actually, yeah, we need 2 water glasses for the Txakoli, actually.
Take them.
Okay, so I think the best way to demonstrate what I mean by the difference between fine wine and fun wine is 2 classic wines from Spain, completely different. So first we've got the López de Heredia, Tondonia white. It's got this little cage, so you need to sort of deal with that first.
In my sommelier school, I was taught to swirl it at the end.
Oh, probably.
Yeah.
And this is one of the not only the great white wines of Spain, it's one of the great white wines of the world. Interestingly, based on relatively neutral grape variety, Viura. But this is a wine that, we know that, you have this wine for lunch, and when you first open it, you're often quite overwhelmed by the deep gold colour, the kind of really quite noticeably oxidative notes. And it can seem quite challenging, but you know for a fact that as it sits in the carafe over 2, 3, 4 hours, you can just keep coming back to it during the course of a long lunch, and the wine just moves and shape shifts and all sorts of wonderful fruit and spice aromas and flavors come out. And this for me is the definition of a truly fine wine. Great history, unique production method, very much crafted by the people who make it, and so there we have, undoubtedly fine wine. And I brought this also just because it's a delicious wine. I think it's great to drink. Now, we have another classic wine of Spain, Txakoli, from País Vasco. Now, this also has a history, like it goes back a few hundred years. In the north of Spain, the Basque Country, everything's different. They've got their own unique language, Euskera, which is like nothing else in the world. People say it's a bit similar to Hungarian or Finnish, but not really either. Mm-hmm. I believe they even have their own blood type, actually, the Basques. It's amazing. And these wines are served in local bars in San Sebastian with little tapas dishes. And there's a local cider as well, which is the same. It has some dissolved carbon dioxide. Mm-hmm. In the old days, they used to just bottle the wine very, very early, like at the end of winter. And they would just use the carbon dioxide from the barrel. Nowadays, modern Txakoli is made in pressurized stainless steel tanks, but they capture the residual carbon dioxide from the main ferment. So it's not gas injected. It's not like a sparkling wine. And then they have these Txakoli pourers in all the bars. It's mainly where you get them from, because it's a little kind of like bit of theatre. They normally serve them in flat-bottomed glasses, but it'll work with this. And basically, if you try to pour wine from here into a glass, the wine would go over there. But the Txakoli pourer has a hole in it, you see. Mm-hmm. So what you do is you pour, and the wine goes beautifully down, but then explodes in the glass. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. Smell that. It's just bursting with hopefully salty, beautiful,
it is salty. Yeah.
Sort of lemony sort of flavors. And this is exactly the reason they developed this. In the local language, they say it breaks the bubbles, but it wakes up the wine.
Yeah.
And what a wonderful tradition to have a wine that needs waking up by pouring from a height. I just love it. And you can imagine, they pour it in really small serves, and you go around the tapas bars of San Sebastian and you get a little, glass of Txakoli, and you take a bite to eat of a mushroom or something, and you move on to the next bar. So it's beautifully integrated into how they eat and live and socialize, which I think is just wonderful. So it's a wine with like great tradition, great history. Is it a fine wine? No, it's not. It's a fun wine, but it's because the whole point of Txakoli is freshness, young, fresh. So they said to themselves, how can we make it as young and fresh as possible, all the way up to serving it? And for me, there's a bit of the wine world that I love to explore, both in drinking and making. And it's where the Venn diagram of fine wine and fun wine intersect, where you can get maybe old vines, like I do in England, like serious fruit, or great tradition, like in the Basque Country. And you get a wine that on the one hand is very, very drinkable, but on the other hand has some actual quality. And if you want to sit on it, in particularly I think the Pét-nat, people often say there's some real complexity there. And that can only come from the old vines. We can't add it in the winery. And I think of this category as, I call it thinky drinky. So it's basically wines that are very drinkable and smashable and fun. But if you want to just pause a second and look for some detail and quality or interest, it's there as well.
Okay, so that answers my next question. Can wine be both fun and fine?
There you go. Thinky, thinky. There's also a great thing I love about this. In the Basque Country, they have their own language, Euskera, and white Txakoli is made from a grape called Hondarribia Zuri, which translates as the grape that is white. And if you ever you also get the very rare pink Txakoli, is made from Hondarribia Beltzer, which translates as the grape that is red.
The best things are simple in life.
There you go.
All right. Well, I think it's such a fun moment that we're having here, but I will still pull you back and ask you more serious questions. How does the vocabulary differ when we talk about fun wine versus fine wine?
That's a great question.
Does it differ? It should.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think fun wine, I think it's all about this idea of freshness, drinkability. I'm not a big sort of wine score person. Doesn't really feature in my life much. I don't think about wine like that. But I do. I'll give you one example. I make these two wines in Australia, Astro Bunny and Piggy Pop, and travel around visiting, customers and restaurants and wine bars. And over the years, it used to really annoy me, or sort of bugging me, that I'd go in with the two bottles and maybe we'd be at a dinner or something and everyone would be drinking. And the Astro Bunny was always finished first. And the Piggy Pop was always like only halfway through. And I saw this enough times to start thinking, we need to put more drinkability into the Piggy Pop. We need to put, and the phrase we used in the winery was like, put more love in the wine. But effectively, it's the least scientific measurement. How fast do a group of random people drink two bottles? But I saw it enough times to notice it. And so over about 4 years, we did a lot of things with the Piggy Pop to actually lighten the color, soften the tannins, but at the same time get more fruit power into it. And eventually, there was one night when I was sitting there and then the Piggy Pop was finished first and I couldn't be happier because it had taken us like 3 or 4 years of really hard work and thinking to get that drinkability in the wine. So there's a difference in vocabulary, speed of consumption, which is very little talked about. But in the world of fun wine, I think it's one of the key parameters. If you're sitting at a restaurant in the País Vasco overlooking the ocean, eating beautiful grilled fish, Txakoli should be 2 people, 10 minutes.
It is so interesting that you talk about it because I just recently released a video about drinkability. I was talking about, we can talk about wine and, look at the scores, 95, 89, and then the best score is when you see which wine is finished first with a group of friends. Drinkability.
It's not talked about much.
Yeah. Do you think that sometimes wine world mistakes seriousness for quality in wine?
The wine world, I think quality is an interesting one. I think everyone knows quality when they come across it.
Okay.
We get very wrapped up in what quality should be in the wine world and how to talk about it and communicate it to the consumer. But no one ever stops and wonders whether the consumer can tell the difference between a wonderfully high quality grass-fed, aged, steak and a simple burger. Of course they can. Anyone can tell the difference between an organic tomato, slow grown, and a supermarket cheap tomato. I think it's the same with wine. So I think quality, you experience it. You can't always explain what it is, but I think we can all of us can experience it. In terms of it being serious, I think it comes back to the idea of there's a world of wine that gets very involved in appellation and scores and rarity and scarcity and so forth. And that's fine. but that's as distinct as being a fan of classical music. You know, there are some people who like it and understand a lot about it and spend money going to concerts and talking about it. And there are other people who just like going to Iron Maiden concerts, for example. And both are equally valid.
Okay. So you are involved in many different projects. What is next for you?
Great question, actually. I do have some quite big plans in the UK.
Okay.
I'm currently at the start of a process of opening an urban winery in Brighton, the town where I live. But it's going to be basically carbon neutral, low carbon, because there's 5 urban wineries in the UK at the moment. So it's quite a small thing, but none of them really have a philosophy for what an urban winery, its main purpose should be. So an urban winery is in a city where your customers are. And if you think about it, most wineries are in the countryside where the vineyards are. But the journey of the grapes to the winery only happens once a year. It's a very small contribution to the carbon footprint of a bottle of wine. The 2 biggest contributions to the carbon footprint of a bottle of wine are the glass bottle itself, which can be up to 50%, then transport, but not transport of the grapes to the winery, just transport around the world and the consumer driving to buy the wine, that can be 20%. The vineyard's about 15%, the winery inputs are about 10%, and then the packaging itself is about 5%.
Outside of the bottle.
So 50, bottles, very rough figures, bottle 50, transport 20, vineyard 15, winery 10, packaging 5, kind of goes like that. So myself and some friends who are interested in this sort of thing back in the UK, we said to ourselves, well, surely the point of an urban winery is not only to get close to your customers and stop that input. So instead of them driving to buy wine, they walk or cycle. But you can also do away with single-use glass because people can bring back recyclable glass, reusable glass bottles, or you can fill other containers. So in one place, you can get rid of or vastly reduce 70% of the carbon input to a normal bottle of wine, whereas the rest of the wine world tends to focus on the things it can control, which is vineyard and winery and packaging, but they're only 30%. So an urban winery can actually flip that on its head. So the working title for the urban winery is Spin the Bottle, because you're laughing.
Yeah.
Because we're spinning the bottle out of the carbon chain. Right. It also has got a reference to games, party games, but the idea is it's going to be as much a tourism venue as a winery venue, and we're very clear about that. So it'll be tourism-led, experiential-led, so people will engage and have fun. So that's one aspect of it, which is very exciting to do that. But something I'm equally interested in since I've been looking into this for the last year is I've been increasingly thinking about social justice in the wine world and in the wider world. I did a series of films a couple of years ago with my film production company, 1/3 Films. And we traveled all around the world. We visited 6 countries, from Argentina to California to Germany to France to Portugal, and saw all these amazing things happening in the wine industry, cutting edge innovations in regenerative viticulture and green energy in wineries and packaging innovations. But I came away thinking that we're still, if the human experience is a canvas, a painting, in the wine industry, we're still just painting in the corner. And this has really got me thinking recently that we can do a lot in the wine industry, but we're still a very, very small part of the world we live in. And so it's still at a very early stage, this concept, but when we say to ourselves, what will the early urban winery have if it's successful? It'll have customers, lots of happy customers. And then I started talking to local charities in Brighton, local community groups. When you start looking into this in your own city, there aren't hundreds, there are thousands. There are literally, Brighton's a city of less than 1 million people. There are literally thousands of charities and community groups all doing amazing work. And in the wine industry, you've always got to be mindful of the fact that we're dealing with alcohol that can be a societal harm. And I just don't think that the right approach is to say, well, we're going to be an urban winery and then open a food bank. Like, don't try and be a charity, but we can support those charities. So the vision is, in the urban winery, you'll come in, there'll be a hospitality element. We'll say to people, do you want our wine list? Do you want our food list? Do you want our community list? And it will be a list of the 5 local charities we've selected. And there'll be a QR code and people can just click. It's not for money. It's not saying make a donation. It's find out more. So if we have 1,000 customers a week, if just 10 of them click on the local charity and find out about it and end up donating their time, getting involved, I think it's really exciting because it helps our local communities. But also, on the other hand, we're all aware we have this modern sort of, situation of everyone's on their phones, people are connecting less with other human beings. There's, loneliness reported amongst younger generations. So I really see this as a way of hospitality, leveraging the customers you have for a societal good. And if we can prove it works in our urban winery in Brighton, it can be scalable anywhere because people just need to have the app and the tools, and then they can select charities in their town. And imagine the power of every wine bar and restaurant trying to connect its customers with local services that are doing good for the local community. And I've researched it, that there's no model in the world where anyone's doing this. So I'm incredibly excited about this. Yeah. I think wine, not only doing the best we can for the planet in terms of reducing our carbon footprint, but ultimately helping humans, which is often the missing piece in our industry. So there you go.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. That's really beautiful. Thank you. And when is that due? Do you?
We are currently establishing a site. It's quite complicated because we're working with what's called a listed building. So it's got a lot of restrictions on what we can do.
Yeah.
It's a Victorian building.
Okay.
It's going to be a 2 to 3 year build. Right. So we'll be opening in the summer of 2028. Okay. And the societal, the civic angle has a name. We're calling it Good Fruit.
Good Fruit.
Good Fruit, which is actually a name I had for a wine club 25 years ago. And I like the fact it hasn't got the word wine in it, so it can be extended to other shops and venues. Fruit just has this idea of generating something positive. So Good Fruit, I think, is going to be.
All right. So we are almost at the end. And this is a question that I ask every single one of my guests. What is one wine myth you would like to debunk?
Oh, great question. I get quite opinionated about when you go into a restaurant and the wine server or wine waiter or sommelier opens your bottle and then smells the cork. This drives me crazy. And I'll tell you why. I've got a really good reason for this. In that sort of situation, they're going to pour you a bit of the wine to check if it's okay, yeah? And here's the thing. That's a high stakes moment. It's a moment of anxiety, yeah? And even in the wine trade, you feel that anxiety. It's like, oh, the pressure's on. So imagine what just a normal person who's not in the wine trade thinks. Yeah. So in that moment, when you're given a bit of wine to taste in a restaurant, everyone goes quiet. If the wine server has, with a flourish, smelt the cork and not said anything, because what you're checking for mainly is cork taint, that subtly, subconsciously, is giving a green light to a yes decision. Because if it smelt bad to them, the expert in the room, they'd say something. So by them smelling it and saying nothing, I think you as the taster have already had your decision slightly judged and biased because they've given a little green light to this wine is fine, yeah? That's one reason I don't like it. The second reason is just technical, yeah? We have all had wines that were terribly corked. Cork smells fine. And we've all had wines where the cork is covered in mold, smells like really damp wood and terrible, and the wine is clean. So the smell of the cork, it may have a slight connection to cork taint, but it's not a direct connection. So smelling it is just part of this theatre that gets unquestioned, passed down in the cultural memory of people, And I think when people talk about snobbery in wine and things being off-putting, that is my number one. Come the revolution, no more cork sniffing.
Okay, good. I will try to remember that next time I'm working on the floor as well. So the next will be lightning round. Like I will ask you this or that question, and I need only one answer. No philosophy. So cloudy Pét-nat or disgorged Pét-nat?
Cloudy.
Appellations or creative freedom?
Appellations.
Oh. Opening young wines or matured bottles?
Young.
Breaking the rules or rewriting the rules?
Breaking.
Crown cup or cork?
Crown.
City wine bar or vineyard picnic?
Picnic.
Australia or England?
England.
Bordeaux or Burgundy?
Burgundy.
Experience or storytelling?
Experience.
Fun wine or fine wine?
Fun wine.
Okay, good. And the very last question. It is last question, but it's not your last task. So the last question comes from a previous guest, and that was a architect and designer, Martin Spilans. And he asked, what has been the most beautiful winery you have been to in the last year, tasted the wine, and had the full fantastic experience that you almost had to cry?
Okay. Am I allowed to answer not in the last year?
Well, if you don't have any last year, then yes, an answer
Okay.
with a bit wider.
Yeah, very emotional. Let me think. So there is a winery in Australia that's very special called Bindi in the Macedon Ranges in Victoria. And for many years, I used to take groups of overseas wine buyers there. I was part of a company I ran called James Busby Travel. And in the early days, the father was still alive, Bill Dillon. And he was he came from India in his 20s as a young man to Australia. And he was a wonderful man, very philosophical. And we used to turn up with his group of like 15 overseas wine buyers, very excited. And we'd have walk the vineyard and then come back and have a barbecue on the back deck. And Bill used to stand back and not engage. He'd observe people for the first hour or so. And then during the course of the evening, he'd just talk to people individually. And quite often, I used to notice people walking off into the vines for a quiet moment to have a little cry, because he had this amazing ability to see into people and to listen, truly listen, which we very rarely do in this world, and understand what that person maybe needed to hear at that time in their life. And because so few of us ever meet anyone like that, it can be overwhelming. And part of that beautiful soul passed into his son, Michael. And so Bindi is above all things a very emotional winery. And I've been many, many times. I used to buy the wine for the UK. But yeah, I think that's the most emotional winery on the vineyard on the planet.
Okay, nice. And so you do have a question for the next guest.
There's a question that I'm asking everybody I meet at the moment, like literally everybody. It's about AI. I just think it's coming at us so fast. None of us have any idea what's happening. So whoever your next guest is, I would just say, thinking about AI, who are going to be the winners and the losers in the wine industry?
That could be like Master of Wine question as well.
Okay.
Now the exam question, paper 5.
Sure, yeah. But I genuinely ask. I think it's fascinating asking anyone you meet in the wine trade, to a taxi driver, to anyone.
Yeah.
And so there you go.
Yeah.
That's my question.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, we are done now, and I know you have it, but I give this to everyone, so you will have another one in case you have lost it or it's dirty.
Thank you so much
for
my No Sediment merch.
Yes.
How's it look?
Good. So thank you very much. And
thank you.
That's a wrap.
So this is how they serve Txakoli in the wine bars of San Sebastian, which is amazing. But these Txakoli pourers, you can only really get them in the wine bars, in the wine shops, or if you import the wine, they often send a sort of bag of them. So I was in a wine shop in Vitoria once, and someone showed me how to do it yourself. So you can make a Txakoli pourer with a normal cork, and what you do is you make 2 lines down the side like this, and then you do that on the other side as well, and then you go sideways and you just cut off those 2 bits of cork like that, and then you've got something that looks like a sort of thin bit of cork at the bottom of a cork, and then you put that in the bottle, and all going well, does the same thing.
It does, yeah.
And there you go, homemade Txakoli pourer.
Yeah, wow, really?